Whis, a sensual bedtime story for adults, presented by Bedtime Stories. Dim the lights, settle in, and let yourself relax completely. And now, let the story begin. The long drive to Thornwood Estate had been a study in a deepening grey. Rain, a fine, persistent veil, had settled over the ancient landscape, blurring the edges of the world. Elara Vance watched it through the window of the hired car, her gaze tracing the droplets as they raced each other down the glass. The further they drove from the last whisper of a village, the more the trees pressed in, their autumn leaves, once vibrant, now sodden and clinging to skeletal branches. A profound quiet descended, broken only by the rhythmic hum of the engine and the soft swish of the wipers. She had been seeking solace, a quiet corner of the world where the ghosts of her past could not easily follow. Thornwood, a sprawling remote manor tucked deep within the Scottish Highlands, promised just that. Her commission was to catalogue its legendary, untouched private library, a task that required both meticulous scholarship and a monastic solitude. It was precisely what her weary soul craved. The wrought iron gates, ornate and imposing, loomed suddenly from the mist. They swung open with a mournful creak, revealing a winding gravel path that disappeared into a tunnel of ancient yews. The air, even through the closed windows, seemed to grow colder, carrying the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else. Something metallic, like old iron, and a faint, sweet aroma of wood smoke. Then, the house. It emerged from the graying light like a forgotten dream. Stone, the color of a stormy sky, rose 3 stories high, adorned with turrets and gables, its numerous windows, like dark, watchful eyes. Ivy, thick and gnarled, clung to the walls, a verdant shroud that whispered of centuries. It was magnificent, overwhelming, and utterly silent. A petite woman with kind, but reserved, eyes met Elara at the heavy oak door. Mrs. McIntyre, the housekeeper, managed a small, welcoming smile. "Miss Vance? Welcome to Thornwood. We've been expecting you." Her voice was soft, lilting with a Highland cadence, a comforting counterpoint to the house's imposing silence. Inside, the air was cool but not cold, imbued with the scent of beeswax polish, old paper, and a faint, indefinable spice. The entrance hall was vast, floored with flagstones, and dominated by a sweeping staircase that ascended into shadow. A fire crackled merrily in a cavernous hearth, its warmth a welcome embrace after the journey. "Your rooms are through here, Miss Vance," Mrs. McIntyre gestured towards an archway to the left. "And the library, of course, where your work will be. We thought it best to have it adjoining your private quarters, for convenience." Elara's heart gave a little leap of anticipation. Her private quarters were everything she could have wished for. A large, high-ceilinged bedroom with a 4-poster bed draped in heavy velvet, a sitting room with another roaring fire, and a small, elegant bathroom. But it was the library, accessed through a discreet door from her sitting room, that truly stole her breath. It wasn't the main library she'd expected to find, but a smaller, more intimate space. Dark mahogany shelves reached to the ceiling, overflowing with leather-bound volumes, their spines worn smooth by time. A large oak desk stood sentinel in the center, scattered with antique writing implements. The air here was thick with the rich, intoxicating aroma of aged paper, leather and dust, a perfume more alluring to Elara than any gardenia. A tall, arched window looked out onto a forgotten rose garden, now barren and skeletal under the rain. "Dinner will be served at 7, Miss Vance," Mrs. McIntyre said, her voice pulling Elara back to the present. "Just ring if you need anything at all. The master, Mr. Thorne, is away for the time being, so you'll have the run of the house." Away for the time being. The phrase hung in the air, ambiguous. Elara nodded, a vague politeness, her mind already consumed by the treasures surrounding her. She spent the rest of the afternoon simply wandering, touching the spines of books, running her fingers over the cool, polished wood of the desk. The silence of the house was profound, yet not unsettling. It felt ancient, settled, as if it had simply been waiting for her. That night, after a surprisingly delicate dinner of roasted pheasant and root vegetables, Ilara retreated to her library. The fire in the hearth cast dancing shadows on the walls, making the book-lined shelves seem to breathe. She chose a volume at random, a first edition of Byron, and settled into a worn leather armchair, the scent of the old pages a balm to her soul. She read for hours, lost in the lyrical verses, the only sounds the crackle of the fire, and the insistent patter of rain against the window pane. The house seemed to settle around her, a vast, comforting presence. It was only when the fire began to dwindle, and the chill of late evening crept in, that she finally closed the book. As she rose to prepare for bed, a subtle detail caught her eye. On the large oak desk, nestled amongst the quills and inkwells, was a small, intricately carved wooden chess piece, a black knight. She was certain it hadn't been there before. She'd scanned every inch of the desk earlier, her professional eye missing nothing. Yet, there it was, smooth and cool beneath her fingertips. A shiver, not of cold, but of something else. Intrigue, perhaps even a nascent frisson of excitement, traced its way down her spine. Mrs. McIntyre had said the master was away. Could someone else be here? Or was it simply her imagination, playing tricks in this ancient, isolated place? She smiled to herself, a soft, private smile. It added a touch of mystery to her monastic solitude. She left the night where it was. The next few days settled into a rhythm of quiet industry. Ilara devoted herself to the library, meticulously cataloguing, cleaning, and sometimes simply reading. The main library, a grander, more formal space than her personal one, was a treasure trove. Books of every conceivable subject, some centuries old, lined the soaring walls. She worked from dawn until dusk, the gentle murmur of the house her only companion. Yet, there were moments, fleeting and subtle, that hinted at a presence beyond her and Mrs. McIntyre. A faint scent, not of the old house itself, but of something fresh, masculine, like rain-drenched tweed and a hint of pipe tobacco, would occasionally drift through a hallway, only to vanish as quickly as it appeared. A door she was certain she'd left ajar would be closed. A light would be on in a distant wing of the house, only to be dark moments later when she passed by. One afternoon, she was deep in the main library, perched precariously on a rolling ladder, reaching for a particularly dusty tome on medieval heraldry. She stretched, her fingers brushing against the spine, when a soft, cunny thudding sounded from the floor below. Startled, she nearly lost her footing. Looking down, she saw a book, a slim volume of poetry, lying open on the polished oak floor, as if it had just fallen from a shelf. She was certain it hadn't been there a moment before. As she descended the ladder, her heart gave a curious flutter. The air around the fallen book felt charged. She picked it up. It was an old edition of Keats, pages yellowed, binding soft. As she gently closed it, she noticed something. A single pressed white rose petal, fragile and translucent, tucked between the pages of La Belle Dame sans Merci. And beneath it, a faint masculine script, barely legible. "Ah, she took me to her elfin grot." Her breath hitched. This wasn't a random occurrence. Someone had been here recently. Someone who appreciated poetry, who left subtle clues. She tucked the book under her arm, the rose petal now a secret close to her heart, and found herself scanning the cavernous room, a sudden unfamiliar heat blooming in her cheeks. The silence of the library, once comforting, now felt expectant, alive. That evening, as the rain intensified, lashing against the windows like a frustrated lover, Ilara found herself drawn to the grand drawing room. It was a magnificent space, rarely used, filled with antique furniture draped in dust sheets, and a vast unlit fireplace. She had no intention of lighting a fire there, she simply wanted to be in its quiet grandeur. She pushed aside one of the dust sheets from a chaise lounge and sat, gazing out at the tumultuous landscape. The garden, usually a source of calm, was a wild, windswept entity, its ancient trees thrashing against the sky. The wind howled, a mournful, relentless cry. Suddenly a sound distinct from the storm reached her. A piano? A single hesitant note, then another, forming a melancholic melody. It was coming from somewhere deeper in the house, perhaps the music room. The notes were mournful, tender, imbued with a profound sadness. Ilara rose, her heart beating a little faster. She moved silently through the deserted hallways, following the sound. The house, usually so quiet, seemed to echo with the music, each note a question, a plea. She found herself outside a half-open door, framed by dark wood. Peeking in, she saw a grand piano, its polished surface reflecting the faint light from the hallway. And seated at the bench, his back to her, was a man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair falling slightly over the collar of his dark sweater. The fire in the room, small but insistent, cast his profile in a chiaroscuro of light and shadow. His fingers moved over the keys with a grace that belied their strength, coaxing a haunting melody from the instrument. Ilara stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. This was him. The presence she'd felt, the clues she'd found. Marcus Thorne. He had not been away. He had been here all along, a ghost in his own house, an unseen presence she had unknowingly been seeking. He finished the piece, the final notes lingering in the air like a sigh. He didn't move, just sat there, his head bowed. Ilara felt an unbearable ache in her chest, a sudden, overwhelming empathy for this solitary figure, lost in his music. Then, slowly, as if sensing her presence despite her utter stillness, he turned his head. His eyes, even in the dim light, were startling, the color of deep, stormy gray, intense, and fathomless. They met hers across the shadowy room, and in that instant, the world outside, the howling wind, the lushing rain, ceased to exist. All that remained was the taut humming silence between them. He had a strong jawline, shadowed by a hint of stubble, and a mouth that was firm but hinted at a hidden tenderness. He was undeniably handsome, in a rugged, almost feral way, a stark contrast to the refined elegance of the house. A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, a mere ghost of a movement that sent a shiver of awareness through Ilara. It wasn't a greeting, not exactly, but an acknowledgement. A subtle invitation. "You like to wander," he said, his voice a low rumble, surprisingly warm, like aged whiskey. It was the first time she had heard it, and it was even more compelling than the music. Ilara found her voice, a little breathy. Yes. The house is quite captivating." He pushed himself up from the piano bench, moving with an easy grace that suggested coiled strength. He walked towards her, slowly, deliberately, his gaze never leaving hers. Each step he took felt like a tightening of an invisible thread between them. The scent of him, wood smoke, damp wool, and something uniquely his, something earthy and potent, reached her before he did. He stopped a few feet away, close enough for her to feel the warmth radiating from him, close enough for her to see the tiny flecks of gold in his stormy eyes. The air between them thrummed, thick with unspoken questions and burgeoning anticipation. "And you," he murmured, his eyes sweeping over her face, lingering on her mouth, "are not quite what I expected." Ilara felt a blush creep up her neck, a delicious heat that spread through her veins. "And what?" she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "Did you expect, Mr. Thorne?" His gaze sharpened, a faint challenge in its depth. "Someone less observant, less curious, less vibrant." His eyes dropped, tracing the curve of her throat, the swell of her chest beneath the fine wool of her sweater. The lingering intensity of his stare was a tangible touch, a caress that set her skin alight. She swallowed, suddenly acutely aware of her own body, of the rapid beat of her heart, of the way her breath hitched with each inhalation. He was a force of nature, untamed and compelling, and she, a scholar of ancient texts, felt utterly undone by his presence. "And you, Mr. Thorne," she countered, trying to regain some semblance of composure, "were supposed to be away." A genuine smile, slow and devastating, finally curved his lips. It transformed his rugged face, softening the stern lines, revealing a hint of mischief. "A necessary fiction, Miss Vance. Some secrets are best kept close." His voice dropped to a near whisper, a confiding intimacy that made her knees feel weak. "And some discoveries are best made personally. He lifted a hand, and for a heart-stopping moment, Elara thought he would touch her. Her breath caught, her entire being poised, yearning for the contact. But he only gestured vaguely towards the music room. Perhaps you'd care for a drink? The storm shows no sign of abating. We might as well make ourselves comfortable. He turned, a silent invitation, and walked towards a small drinks cabinet tucked into an alcove. Elara watched him go, her senses reeling. He had appeared, finally, not as a shadow or a whisper, but as a tangible, breathtaking reality. And the romantic tension that had been building like a slow, insistent tide now threatened to overwhelm her. She followed him into the room, her steps light as if she were walking on air. The fire glowed, the rain drummed, and the air crackled with a new potent energy. The solitude of Thornwood Estate had just been irrevocably, deliciously broken. He poured 2 generous measures of amber liquid into heavy crystal tumblers. The rich, peaty scent of scotch filled the air. He handed one to her, his fingers brushing hers, a fleeting spark that ignited a deeper warmth within her. "To unexpected company," he murmured, raising his glass, his eyes dark and knowing over the rim. "To unexpected discoveries," Elara replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hand, meeting his gaze with a burgeoning boldness she hadn't known she possessed. She took a sip of the whiskey. It was smooth, fiery, warming her from the inside out, much like his presence. He leaned back against the mantelpiece, watching her, a predatory grace in his stillness. The firelight played across his face, highlighting the sharp angles, the intelligent intensity of his eyes. "Tell me, Miss Vance," he began, his voice a silken thread, "what brings a woman of your particular talents to a place like Thornwood?" Elara took another sip, buying herself a moment. She could feel his gaze on her, dissecting, analyzing, and she found herself wanting to reveal everything, and nothing, all at once. The storm outside raged, a perfect counterpoint to the quiet, simmering storm within her. She knew, with a certainty that thrilled her, that her time at Thornwood had just become far more complicated and infinitely more compelling than she could ever have imagined. The whispers of the house had found their voice, and it was a voice she desperately wanted to hear more of. The whispers of the house had found their voice, and it was a voice she desperately wanted to hear more of. Elara's breath hitched, a silent internal gasp that felt as though it reverberated through the ancient bones of Thornwood itself. Julian's eyes, the color of storm-swept fjords, held hers with an unwavering intensity that seemed to strip away her meticulously constructed layers of academic detachment. She felt exposed, yet perversely invigorated. Her pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a counterpoint to the distant rumble of thunder. He was the first to break the silence, a subtle shift in his posture, a barely perceptible softening around the mouth that hinted at a deep, almost ancient amusement. "Forgive me, Dr. Vance. My thoughts often wander to the history that permeates these walls." His voice was a low murmur, rich and resonant, carrying an undercurrent that suggested far more than mere historical musing. "You have a way of drawing it out." Elara managed a faint smile, her cheeks flushing. "Perhaps it's simply the house itself, Mr. Thorne. It speaks volumes, even in silence." She tried to regain her composure, to anchor herself in the familiar territory of scholarly discourse, but the ground beneath her felt suddenly unstable. The air between them, thick with the scent of aged wood and damp earth from the storm, seemed to crackle with an unspoken energy. Julian rose slowly, his movements fluid and unhurried, like a predator surveying its domain. He walked to the grand fireplace, where a log had just collapsed, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. He nudged it with a polished brass poker, his strong hands moving with an ease that suggested a familiarity with both labor and leisure. The firelight danced across his profile, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw, the slight curve of his lips. "It does," he agreed without turning. "But sometimes it needs an interpreter, someone with a particular sensitivity." He turned then, leaning an arm against the mantelpiece, his gaze once again sweeping over her. This time, it felt less like dissection, and more like a gentle, deliberate caress. "Which I suspect you possess in abundance." The compliment, delivered with such quiet conviction, sent a shiver down Ilara's spine that had nothing to do with the chill of the storm. She found herself unable to look away, caught in the web of his perception. "My sensitivity, as you call it, is primarily to archival data, Mr. Thorne," she managed, her voice a little breathier than she would have liked. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that resonated deep within her. "Is it now? And what do the archives of Thornwood tell you tonight, Dr. Vance, beyond the official records?" The challenge was clear, playful yet profound. He was inviting her to step beyond her academic boundaries, to acknowledge the deeper currents swirling beneath the surface of their interaction. The storm outside intensified, a sudden flash of lightning illuminating the room in stark relief, followed by a deafening clap of thunder that rattled the window panes. "They tell me," Ilara began, her eyes darting to the rain-streaked window, then back to Julian, "that this house holds secrets. Not just the secrets of its former inhabitants, but perhaps its current one as well." She dared to meet his gaze directly, a flicker of defiance mixing with the intoxicating thrill of their game. A slow smile spread across Julian's face, a genuine, captivating expression that transformed his stern features. "Secrets, Dr. Vance. And do you believe all secrets are meant to be unearthed?" "Some are," she countered, her voice gaining strength, "if they hold the key to understanding, to knowing." "And what if knowing brings more questions than answers?" he mused, pushing off the mantelpiece and walking towards the antique drinks cabinet. "Or perhaps, answers one might not wish to find?" He opened the polished oak doors, revealing an array of crystal decanters. "A night such as this calls for something warming. Brandy? Or perhaps a single malt?" "Brandy would be lovely, thank you," Ilara said, grateful for the momentary reprieve, yet acutely aware that the tension had not dissipated, merely shifted. She watched him pour, his movements precise, almost ritualistic. The amber liquid gleamed in the firelight, mirroring the warm glow that had begun to pool in her own veins. He brought the snifter to her, his fingers brushing hers as she took it. The brief touch was electric, sending a jolt through her arm that made her almost drop the glass. Their eyes locked again, and this time, there was an undeniable current of raw, hungry desire in his gaze that mirrored her own burgeoning craving. "To understanding, then," he said, raising his own glass, his voice a husky whisper. He didn't wait for her to respond, taking a slow sip, his eyes never leaving hers. Ilara mirrored his action, the rich, fiery liquid warming her throat, then spreading a comforting heat through her chest. It was potent, smooth, and perfectly suited to the wild night outside. "To understanding," she echoed, her voice barely audible. They sat then, not returning to their previous positions, but Julian chose the armchair opposite hers, pulling it slightly closer to the fire. The storm continued its tempestuous dance, but inside the world had narrowed to the two of them, the crackling fire, and the silent language passing between them. "Tell me, Dr. Vance," Julian began, his voice softer now, less challenging, more inviting. "What drew you to Thornwood? Beyond the academic pursuit, of course. There are many houses with history." Ilara considered her answer carefully. "The sheer scope of the archive, for one, the unbroken lineage, but also a feeling, a resonance. It's almost as if the house itself calls out." She took another sip of brandy, finding courage in its warmth. "And your family, the Thorns, have always been rather enigmatic, reclusive even, which for a historian is often the most intriguing quality." He smiled faintly, a hint of something melancholic in his eyes. "Enigmatic, perhaps, reclusive, certainly, a necessary trait, some would argue, for those who guard old secret." He swirled the brandy in his glass, the liquid catching the light. "My ancestors believed in keeping their own counsel, and their own counsel in turn kept them." "Kept them from what?" Ilara ventured, leaning forward slightly, her academic curiosity momentarily overriding her sensual awareness, though the latter still hummed beneath the surface. "From the scrutiny of the outside world. From judgment, From the pain of remembering things best left buried, he replied, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The world has a way of twisting narratives, doesn't it? Especially those that defy easy categorization. Ilara felt a prickle of unease. He was speaking in riddles again, hinting at depths she hadn't yet plumbed. Are you implying there are narratives about Thornwood that have been deliberately suppressed, Mr. Thorne? He met her gaze, his eyes suddenly piercing. I'm implying that history is written by the victors, Dr. Vance. And sometimes the true story is found in the margins, in the silences, in the things that were too inconvenient, too scandalous, or too inexplicable to ever be recorded in full. He paused, taking a long drink. My family has a long history of the inexplicable. The fire crackled, momentarily loud in the sudden quiet. Ilara felt a thrill, a jolt of recognition. This was it. This was the opening she had been seeking, the crack in the carefully constructed facade. But it was also unnerving, hinting at something far grander and more unsettling than she had anticipated. Are you referring to the local legends? She asked, choosing her words carefully. The whispers of unusual occurrences? Of the house having a life of its own? Julian's lips curved into a wry smile. Some might call them legends. Others, perhaps, simply truths that have been allowed to drift into the realm of folklore, making them easier to dismiss. He set his glass down on a small side table, then leaned back, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. Tell me, Dr. Vance, do you believe in ghosts? The question hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. Ilara's mind raced. As a historian, she dealt in facts, in verifiable evidence. Yet, she had always been drawn to the liminal spaces, the ambiguities. I believe in the lingering echoes of the past, she said, choosing her words carefully. In the way powerful emotions, significant events, can leave an imprint on a place. A kind of energetic residue. Residue, he repeated, a thoughtful expression on his face. An interesting choice of word. And do you believe this residue can influence the living? He turned his head slowly, his eyes finding hers again. The intensity was back, a magnetic pull that made her heart pound. Can it whisper in their ears? Can it guide their steps? Can it compel them? The air was thick with unspoken meanings. He wasn't just asking about ghosts, he was asking about influence, about destiny, about the power of a place and its history to shape the present. And in the way he looked at her, she felt as if he were implying that Ashe was being compelled, drawn into something she couldn't yet comprehend. Perhaps, Ilara admitted, her voice barely a whisper. In a metaphorical sense, certainly. History compels us to learn, to understand. And in a literal sense, he pressed, his voice a low rumble. If this house, for example, held a particularly strong residue of desire, or grief, or love, could it compel those who dwell within it to feel those things more acutely? His eyes were like twin pools of dark water, reflecting the firelight, mirroring the storm outside. Ilara felt a warmth spread through her core, a sudden potent awareness of the raw emotion he was hinting at. The way he said desire, grief, love, each word was a caress, a challenge, an invitation. It's a fascinating hypothesis, she managed, her scholarly facade cracking under the weight of his gaze. A house as a conduit for emotion. More than a conduit, Julian corrected softly. Perhaps a vessel. A living entity, absorbing and reflecting. And sometimes, projecting. He paused, a languid silence stretching between them. Do you feel it, Dr. Vance, the residue of Thornwood? He was no longer just speaking about the house. He was speaking about the residue between them. The undeniable current that had begun to flow, strong and undeniable. Ilara felt a tremor pass through her. Her skin tingled, as if every nerve ending had suddenly become hyper-aware. The storm outside seemed to recede, replaced by the internal tempest brewing within her. I feel a profound sense of history, she began, trying to find her footing, to intellectualize the visceral sensations. A weight of lives lived within these walls, but also an energy, a vibrant, almost sentient presence. Julian nodded slowly, a knowing glint in his eyes. Sentient. Yes, many have felt it. Some embrace it. Others try to fight it. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze unwavering. And which do you intend to do, Lara? The use of her first name, so casually delivered, yet so deliberately chosen, sent another jolt through her. It was an intimacy, a breaking of the professional barrier that had, until now, provided a thin shield. Her breath caught in her throat. I intend to understand it, she finally said, her voice a little shaky. To research it, to document it. He smiled, a slow, sensual curve of his lips. And what if understanding it requires more than documentation? What if it requires surrender? The word hung in the air, charged with meaning, heavy with implication. Surrender. To the house? To the history? To Emaine? Ilara felt a blush creep up her neck, a telltale sign of her inner turmoil. The brandy warmed her, but it was Julian's gaze that truly set her alight. Surrender is not a concept often employed in academic research, Mr. Thorne, she replied, trying to inject a note of professional detachment into her voice. But it came out sounding breathless. Perhaps the best research, the most profound understanding, sometimes demands it, he countered smoothly. To truly know a place, or a person, one must sometimes let go of the need for control. To allow oneself to be guided. He rose from his armchair, his movements once again slow and deliberate, and walked towards the grand arched window. The rain lashed against the glass, blurring the dark landscape beyond. This house, he said, his voice softer, almost reverent, has a powerful will. It chooses those it reveals itself to. He turned, facing her across the room, the firelight painting his silhouette in shades of gold and shadow. And I believe it has chosen you, Ilara. The weight of his words, the quiet conviction in his tone, settled over her like a heavy velvet cloak. She felt a strange mixture of exhilaration and trepidation. Was he merely being poetic, or was there something more? Something genuinely supernatural at play? And if the house had chosen her, what, precisely, was it choosing her for? Her mind, ever analytical, tried to grasp onto logical explanations. But her body was responding on a far more primal level. The scent of his subtle cologne, the warmth radiating from him even across the room, the deep timbre of his voice, all conspired to bypass her intellect and awaken something deeper, something dormant. Why do you say that? She asked, her voice a near whisper. He pushed his hands into his pockets, his posture relaxed, yet radiating undeniable power. Because I've seen others come and go. Historians, architects, even a parapsychologist once, bless his earnest soul. They all approached Thornwood as a subject to be studied, a problem to be solved. They tried to impose their will upon it. He paused, his gaze sweeping over her, lingering on her face. You, Ilara, you seem to listen, to feel, to allow yourself to be drawn in. He took a step towards her, then another, slowly closing the distance between them. Each step was deliberate, an unspoken promise of proximity. Ilara felt her heart thudding against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She remained perfectly still, mesmerized, her eyes fixed on his. And tonight, he continued, his voice dropping to a seductive murmur as he stopped just a few feet from her, the firelight casting long shadows that stretched between their bodies. Tonight, I sensed a different kind of curiosity in you. Not just the academic kind. His eyes, dark and fathomless, searched hers. Am I wrong? The air was electric, thick with unspoken longing. Ilara felt herself tremble, a delicious shiver that had nothing to do with the chill of the night. She wanted to deny it, to retreat behind her professional mask. But the truth was too potent, too overwhelming. She was drawn to him, with an intensity that both thrilled and terrified her. The storm outside seemed to echo the tempest within her, a wild, untamed energy. No, she breathed, the word a mere sigh. You're not wrong. A slow, knowing smile touched his lips, a predatory grace that sent a wave of heat through her. He reached out a hand, his fingers long and elegant, and lightly touched the back of her hand, which was still resting on the arm of her chair. The contact was feather-light, yet it sent a jolt through her entire being, a current of pure sensation that made her gasp. "Good," he murmured, his thumbs stroking the sensitive skin on the back of her hand. "Because this house, it thrives on connection, on passion, and I believe, Ilara, that you have a great deal of both to offer." His touch was like a spark igniting a tinderbox. Ilara felt a warmth spread from her hand, up her arm, and through her chest, blossoming into a fierce, insistent ache. Her gaze was locked with his, unable to break free from the intoxicating spell he wove. The scent of him, clean and subtly masculine, filled her senses, blurring the edges of her rational mind. He leaned closer, his dark eyes searching hers, his breath warm on her cheek. "Tell me," he whispered, his voice a husky caress. "What else do you feel, Ilara, when you allow yourself to truly listen to Thornwood's whispers?" Ilara's mind reeled. She felt the ancient wood beneath her, the warmth of the fire, the fury of the storm, and most profoundly, the magnetic pull of Julian Thorn. She felt a yearning deep and insistent that she hadn't known she possessed. A hunger for connection, for understanding, for something profoundly, exquisitely sensual. "I feel," she began, her voice barely audible, "I feel an undeniable force. A history that demands to be felt, not just read." Her eyes flickered to his lips, then back to his eyes, a silent invitation passing between them. "And I feel drawn, irresistibly drawn." His smile deepened, a slow, sensual unveiling. His thumb continued its gentle caress on her hand, sending shivers through her. He lowered his head, his gaze still fixed on hers, his dark eyes promising untold pleasures. The proximity was intoxicating, the air between them thick with unspoken desire. "Good," he whispered again, the word a profound affirmation. "Because some forces, Ilara, are not meant to be resisted." He paused, his eyes dropping to her lips, a silent question in their depths. The anticipation was exquisite, a sweet torment that made her breath catch. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the faint scent of brandy, and something uniquely masculine. Every fiber of her being screamed for him to close the distance, to taste the promise that hung tantalizingly between them. The storm outside chose that moment to unleash another torrent of rain. A sudden, violent downpour that hammered against the windows, a wild, primal accompaniment to the simmering passion in the room. A gust of wind rattled the old glass, and a log in the fireplace shifted, sending a shower of sparks upwards, momentarily illuminating the charged space between them. Julian's eyes, dark and intense, met hers one last time, a silent question passing between them. Was this the moment? Was this where the whispers of Thornwood, and the undeniable pull between them, would finally find their voice in a kiss? He leaned in, ever so slowly, his gaze still locked on her lips, then her eyes, seeking permission, offering an invitation that she desperately wanted to accept. Ilara felt her own lips part slightly, a silent, eager plea. The air thickened, charged with expectation, and she could almost taste the brandy on his breath. The promise of his kiss. But then, just as she thought he would finally bridge the minuscule gap, a distant chime echoed through the house, the grandfather clock in the hall, striking the hour. The sound, though muted, was a sharp, unwelcome intrusion, pulling them back from the precipice of their shared moment. Julian's movement froze, his eyes still holding hers, but the intensity in them softened, a flicker of control returning. He straightened up, slowly, breaking the spell of their dangerous proximity. The air, which had been thick with unspoken promises, thinned, leaving Ilara feeling suddenly exposed and breathless. He released her hand, the warmth of his touch lingering on her skin long after he withdrew. "It seems," he said, his voice a low, even tone that masked the raw edge of their previous exchange, "that the evening has grown late." Ilara felt a wave of disappointment, sharp and potent, wash over her. It was a physical ache, a yearning left unfulfilled. She wanted to rage at the clock, at the sudden return to propriety. But she understood. He was Julian Thorne, master of Thornwood, and a man who clearly operated with a deep-seated sense of order, even amidst chaos. She rose from her chair, her legs feeling strangely unsteady. "Yes," she managed, her voice a little hoarse. "It has." He walked towards the door, his silhouette tall and imposing against the flickering firelight. "I trust you found the conversation illuminating?" he asked without turning, the double meaning not lost on her. "Extremely," Elara replied, gathering her composure, though her heart still hammered wildly. "And rather compelling." He finally turned, a faint, enigmatic smile playing on his lips. "Good. Thornwood and its history has a habit of doing that." His eyes met hers again, and in their depths, she saw not just the return of control, but a deeper, more profound promise. A promise of future encounters, of questions yet to be asked, and answers yet to be revealed. A promise that this was only the beginning. "Rest well, Elara," he said, his voice a soft command, a lingering caress. "We have much more history to uncover." With a subtle nod, he opened the door, allowing the soft glow of the hall lamp to spill into the drawing room. Elara felt the faint chill of the air, a stark contrast to the heat that had enveloped her only moments before. She walked past him, acutely aware of his presence, the lingering scent of him in the air. As she ascended the grand staircase, the whispers of the house seemed to follow her, no longer just murmurs of the past, but anticipatory hums of what was yet to come. Her time at Thornwood, she knew, was only just beginning to unfold its deepest, most intoxicating secrets. And she, Elara Vance, was utterly, irrevocably ready to surrender to them. The grand staircase curved upwards, a silent, majestic sentinel observing the unfolding drama of its inhabitants. Elara's hand glided over the polished mahogany banister, each step a deliberate ascent into the unknown. The whispers of the house, once distant and spectral, now seemed to gather closer, a chorus of hushed anticipation that thrummed beneath her skin. The scent of old wood, beeswax, and a faint, indefinable sweetness, perhaps the ghost of a long-faded perfume, enveloped her, a fragrant prelude to the secrets she sensed were poised to unfurl. Her room was a sanctuary of gilded silence, bathed in the soft, diffused glow of a single lamp left burning low. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn, shutting out the encroaching night, and creating a cocoon of intimacy. She moved slowly, a creature in a dream, her fingers going to the buttons of her dress. Each fastener unhooked felt like a release, not just of fabric, but of the carefully constructed composure she had worn all day. The silk slipped from her shoulders, pooling around her feet in a whisper of dark sapphire. She stepped out of it, acutely aware of the chill air on her bare skin, a stark contrast to the heat that still bloomed beneath her ribs. Her reflection in the ornate cheval mirror was a study in vulnerability, flushed cheeks, eyes that held a new, unreadable depth, and the body that felt exquisitely alive, humming with a nascent energy. She caught a glimpse of the faint mark Dominic's thumb had left on her wrist, a brand almost, burning even now, with a phantom heat. A shiver traced its way down her spine, a delicious frisson that was both apprehension and desire. She chose a delicate silk nightgown, a pale cream that felt impossibly soft against her skin, clinging in all the right places. A second skin that promised comfort, yet hinted at the curves beneath. She moved into the adjoining bathroom, a marvel of marble and polished brass, where a large, claw-footed tub awaited. Turning the taps, she watched as the water began to fill, steaming gently, a welcoming cloud in the cool air. She added a few drops of a lavender and rose essential oil, watching the iridescent swirls as the scent bloomed, calming yet undeniably sensual. Slipping into the warm embrace of the water was like shedding another layer, a final surrender to the sensations that had been swirling within her. The heat seeped into her muscles, dissolving the last vestiges of tension, leaving her feeling languid and pliant. She closed her eyes, letting her head rest against the cool porcelain rim. Images flickered behind her eyelids. Dominic's intense gaze, the curve of his mouth as he smiled, the low rumble of his voice, the potent scent of him. Her body responded, a soft ache stirring deep within her, a yearning that was both profound and startling in its intensity. She ran a soapy hand over her collarbone, down the curve of her hip, over the swell of her breast, each touch a heightened awareness of herself, of the woman she was becoming in this house, under his watchful eye. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a thick, fluffy towel, her skin glowed, flushed and supple. She moisturized slowly, deliberately, her fingers tracing the planes of her body, a ritual of self-care that felt imbued with a new significance. The soft silk of her nightgown was a balm, a whispered promise against her skin as she slipped between the cool, crisp sheets of the enormous four-poster bed. The mattress was a cloud, the pillows plump and inviting. Yet, sleep eluded her. She lay there, staring up at the canopy, listening to the ancient house breathe around her. The wind sighed softly outside, rustling the leaves of unseen trees, a distant cousin to the whispers of the house. Every creak of old timber, every subtle shift, seemed to amplify her awareness, drawing her further into the fabric of Thornwood. It wasn't just Dominic who held her captive now, it was the house itself, a living entity with its own gravitational pull, drawing her deeper into its heart, into its secrets. She thought of the library, the vastness of it, the untold stories held within its walls. That was her purpose here, she reminded herself, to catalogue, to preserve. But she knew, with a certainty that thrilled and terrified her, that her purpose was becoming intertwined with something far more personal, far more profound. Thornwood was asking for more than just her professional expertise, it was asking for her, Elara Vance, heart and soul. And as the night deepened and the moonlight eventually pierced through a gap in the curtains, casting silver stripes across the floor, she knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that she was ready to give it. The dawn broke with a gentle grey light, seeping slowly into her room, painting the rich fabrics and dark wood with a soft, ethereal glow. Elara woke slowly, emerging from a dreamless yet deeply restorative sleep. There was no lingering grogginess, only a profound sense of clarity and a quiet hum of energy beneath her skin. The anxieties of yesterday had softened, replaced by a keen anticipation. Today, she would begin her work. Today, she would see Dominic again. She rose, stretching languidly, her muscles unknotting with a satisfying ease. The silk nightgown whispered around her as she moved towards the window, pulling back the heavy velvet curtains. The view was breathtaking. Rolling lawns, ancient trees just beginning to blush with the first hints of autumn, and in the distance, a glimmer of water. A lake, perhaps, or a wide river. The air was crisp and fresh, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. Thornwood, in the morning light, felt less like a shadowed mystery, and more like a vibrant, living presence. A quick shower, invigorating and warm, washed away the last traces of sleep. She dressed thoughtfully, choosing a tailored skirt of deep forest green and a cream silk blouse that echoed the softness of her nightgown. It was professional, yet elegant, hinting at her femininity without overtly displaying it. She pinned her dark hair up, allowing a few soft tendrils to frame her face, and applied a touch of rose-tinted lip balm. She wanted to feel composed, in control, yet subtly radiant. Descending the grand staircase, she felt a different kind of confidence than the night before. The whispers of the house were still present, but now they felt more like a gentle encouragement than a shadowy foreboding. She found her way to the dining room, guided by the faint clinking of porcelain and the murmur of voices. It was a sunlit room, with tall windows overlooking the gardens, and a long, polished table set for breakfast. Dominic was already there, seated at the head of the table, engrossed in a newspaper. The morning light softened the angular planes of his face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the dark sweep of his lashes. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit, a stark contrast to the casual attire of the previous evening. Yet he exuded the same powerful, almost primal aura. He looked up as she entered, his eyes, those startling grey eyes, meeting hers across the room. A slow, subtle smile played on his lips. A silent greeting that sent a familiar tremor through her. "Good morning, Alara," he said, his voice a low, warm timbre that seemed to resonate through the quiet room. "Sleep well?" "Good morning, Dominic," she replied, her voice steady despite the quickening of her pulse. "Very well, thank you. And you?" "As well as one can, knowing the treasures that await discovery," he said, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than strictly necessary, a silent acknowledgement of something beyond the polite pleasantries. He gestured to a chair opposite him, already laid with a pristine napkin and silver cutlery. "Please, help yourself. The cook has outdone herself this morning." A small, older woman, the same housekeeper she'd glimpsed briefly the night before, bustled in from the kitchen with a fresh pot of coffee, offering a warm, almost maternal smile to Alara. She poured a cup for Alara, the rich aroma filling the air. Plates laden with scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, artisanal bread, and fresh fruit were artfully arranged on the sideboard. Alara served herself, aware of Dominic's presence, the subtle shift in the atmosphere between them. Their conversation over breakfast was light, yet charged. They discussed the weather, the beauty of the Thornwood Gardens, and the logistics of Alara's work. He asked about her previous projects, listening intently, his eyes never leaving hers as she spoke. There was an intellectual curiosity in his gaze that she found immensely appealing, a depth that went beyond mere polite interest. He was truly engaged, truly present. "The library is quite extensive," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. "My family has been collecting for centuries. You'll find everything from medieval manuscripts to first editions of modern literature. It's a daunting task, I imagine." "A delightful one, I assure you," Alara responded, her eyes sparkling with genuine enthusiasm. "There's nothing quite like the thrill of uncovering a forgotten gem or piecing together the history of a collection." "I look forward to seeing what you unearth," he said, a hint of something more than just professional interest in his tone. "The house has many stories, Alara, not all of them bound in leather and ink." The unspoken implication hung in the air, a silken thread of tension stretching between them. After breakfast, Dominic led her back to the library. The sheer scale of it was even more impressive in the daylight. Sunlight streamed through the towering arched windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, highlighting the intricate carvings on the bookshelves, and painting stripes across the worn Persian rugs. The scent of old paper and leather was intoxicating, a perfume of knowledge and history. "I've had a small desk set up for you in the corner," Dominic indicated, pointing to a beautiful antique desk nestled beneath a large window, overlooking a particularly serene part of the garden. "And all the necessary supplies. Feel free to arrange things as you wish. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask Mrs. Thorne, the housekeeper, or myself." He stood for a moment, observing her, a silent question in his eyes. Alara felt a blush creep up her neck under his steady gaze. "Thank you, Dominic," she said, her voice a little softer than she intended. "It's perfect." He nodded, a slight smile playing on his lips, and then, with a brief, almost reluctant inclination of his head, he left, leaving her alone in the vast, echoing silence of the library. Alara took a deep breath, letting the atmosphere of the room wash over her. This was it. Her domain. She approached the desk, admiring the rich wood, the old-fashioned inkwell, the stack of fresh catalogue cards. She spent the first hour simply familiarizing herself with the layout, walking the towering aisles, running her fingers over the spines of countless books. The sheer volume was overwhelming, yet exhilarating. She could feel the weight of history in her hands, the echoes of generations of readers and thinkers. She decided to start systematically, beginning with the oldest section, near the grand fireplace. The books here were truly ancient, some bound in vellum, others in thick, worn leather, their titles often in Latin or archaic English. She gently pulled a heavy tome from its shelf, its pages brittle with age, the smell of dust and antiquity filling her nostrils. It was a collection of 17th-century poetry, beautifully illustrated. As she carefully examined it, she noticed a faint indentation on the spine of the book next to it, almost imperceptible. Curious, she pulled that one out too. It was a small, unassuming volume, bound in faded green leather, with no title on the spine. It felt different from the others, lighter, almost fragile. She opened it carefully, and instead of printed text, she found elegant, looping script. It was a journal. The first entry was dated 1888. The handwriting was feminine, delicate, yet imbued with a vibrant energy. Ilara's heart gave a little lurch. This was it, the kind of personal discovery that made her work so thrilling. She sat down at her desk, the journal resting carefully in her hands, its pages whispering secrets of a bygone era. She began to read, her professional curiosity quickly giving way to a more personal fascination. The journal belonged to a woman named Eleanor, a governess who had lived at Thornwood during the late Victorian era d'Artio. Her entries painted a vivid picture of life in the grand house, filled with descriptions of the children she taught, the strictures of her position, and the beauty of the surrounding estate. But beneath the surface of these daily observations, a deeper, more passionate narrative began to emerge. Eleanor wrote of a forbidden love, a clandestine affair with the master of the house, a man she referred to only as H. Ilara read on, completely absorbed, the outside world fading away. Eleanor's words were laced with longing, with the exquisite pain of unfulfilled desire, and the fleeting moments of stolen passion. She described secret meetings in the moonlit gardens, hushed conversations in the library, after everyone else had retired, and the electrifying touch of H's hand. The prose was eloquent, evocative, painting a picture of a love that was both tender and intensely physical, bound by the social constraints of the time, yet burning fiercely beneath them. A particularly poignant entry described a night spent in the library, a sudden thunderstorm raging outside, trapping them together. H had read poetry to her by firelight, his voice a low rumble that had sent shivers down her spine. And then, in a moment of shared vulnerability, he had kissed her, a deep, soul-stirring kiss that had left her breathless and trembling. His lips, Eleanor wrote, were a revelation, a silent promise of delights I had only ever dreamed of. The scent of him, the taste of him became etched upon my soul. Ilara felt a strange sense of déjà vu, a mirroring of her own experience with Dominic, of the unspoken currents that flowed between them. The air in the library, once still, now felt charged with the echoes of Eleanor's passion. She was so engrossed that she didn't hear him approach. It was only when a shadow fell across the page that she looked up, her heart leaping into her throat. Dominic stood beside her desk, a faint smile playing on his lips, his gaze warm and knowing. "Lost in another world?" he murmured, his voice soft, almost conspiratorial. Ilara felt a blush creep up her neck. She quickly, almost instinctively, closed the journal, as if protecting its secrets. Yes, I suppose I was," she admitted, feeling a little flustered. "I found this. It's a journal, from a governess who lived here in the late 1800s. Dominic's smile widened, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "Eleanor, I thought you might stumble upon it. It's one of Thornwood's less-known treasures, a rather scandalous tale if memory serves." "Scandalous?" Ilara repeated, her eyebrow arching slightly. "Or simply heartbreakingly romantic?" He chuckled, a rich, deep sound that resonated in the quiet library. "Perhaps both. Eleanor was quite spirited for her time, and my great-great-grandfather, well, he had a reputation for being persuasive." Ilara's gaze met his, and for a long moment, the air between them thickened, laden with unspoken understanding. The story of Eleanor and H seemed to bridge the centuries, connecting them to a shared human experience of desire and longing within these very walls. "She writes beautifully," Ilara said, her voice a little breathy. "Of secret meetings, of stolen kisses by firelight." Dominic leaned against the edge of her desk, his proximity suddenly very potent. His scent, that unique blend of old leather, paper, and something distinctly masculine, enveloped her, making her senses swim. "The library has always been a repository of secrets, Ilara," he said, his voice dropping to a low murmur. "Not just scholarly ones. It's seen its share of clandestine encounters, I assure you." His eyes, those intense grey eyes, held hers, and in their depths she saw a reflection of Eleanor's longing, and a promise of what might yet be. He reached out, his long fingers hovering just inches from the closed journal. "May I?" he asked, his voice a soft invitation. Elara hesitated for only a fraction of a second, then nodded, her pulse quickening. He gently took the journal from her, his fingers brushing hers, sending a jolt of electricity through her arm. His touch was warm, firm, and surprisingly tender. He opened it to a random page, his gaze sweeping over the elegant script. A faint smile touched his lips. "She describes the rose garden in autumn," he read aloud, his voice low and resonant. "How the last blooms cling to life, their petals heavy with dew, holding fast to the sweetness of summer even as winter approaches. A metaphor, perhaps, for their own defiant love." He looked up, his gaze locking with hers. "Do you believe in defiant love, Elara?" The question hung in the air, weighted with a significance that transcended Eleanor's story. Elara felt herself drawn into the depths of his eyes, lost in the intensity of his gaze. I believe in passion," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "And sometimes passion defies everything." His smile deepened, a slow, knowing curve of his lips that sent a shiver of pure sensation down her spine. He closed the journal, carefully placing it back on her desk. "Indeed," he murmured, his eyes still holding hers. "Thornwood has seen much passion. It tends to linger in the very air, doesn't it?" He didn't move away. He remained leaning against the desk, a silent, powerful presence, his proximity an almost unbearable, exquisite torture. Elara found herself unable to break eye contact, caught in the magnetic pull of his gaze. The library, once a place of quiet scholarship, now hummed with an undeniable erotic charge. I should get back to work," Elara finally managed, her voice a little hoarse. She gestured vaguely at the stacks of books. Dominic's eyes flickered to the books, then back to her, a hint of regret in their depths. "Of course," he said, his voice still low, almost a caress. He straightened slowly, but his hand lingered on the edge of the desk, close to hers. "I look forward to hearing more of Eleanor's story, and perhaps of your own discoveries." He turned to leave but paused at the end of the aisle, looking back at her. "Dinner is at 8, he said. "In the formal dining room tonight. We'll be dining alone." The implication was clear, potent. It wasn't just a meal, it was an invitation, a continuation of the dance that had begun between them. Elara felt a thrill, sharp and exhilarating, course through her. "I'll be there," she said, her voice steady now, infused with a quiet determination. As he finally disappeared from view, leaving her once again to the silence of the library, Elara found she couldn't focus on the books. Her mind replayed their conversation, the intensity of his gaze, the brush of his fingers, the lingering scent of him. She picked up Eleanor's journal again, her fingers tracing the faded cover. The defiant love of a governess and her master. A story echoing through time, perhaps finding new resonance in the present. The afternoon passed in a blur of anticipation. She tried to work, but her thoughts kept drifting, pulled towards the evening, towards Dominic. She imagined the formal dining room, the candlelight, the intimacy of dining alone with him. What would they talk about? What unspoken messages would pass between them? As the shadows lengthened and the library grew dim, Elara realized she needed to prepare. She closed Eleanor's journal, tucking it carefully into her satchel, a secret to be savored later. The house, she sensed, was holding its breath, waiting for the night to unfold. And she, Elara Vance, was utterly, irrevocably ready to step into its embrace, and into his ease. Elara chose a gown of deep emerald silk, its fabric a whisper against her skin, as she fastened the tiny buttons. The scent of jasmine and old wood clung to her, a subtle perfume that felt perfectly at home in this ancient dwelling. In the cheval glass, her reflection was a woman transformed, eyes bright with anticipation, lips curved in a soft, knowing smile. Her heart, a hummingbird trapped in her ribs, beat a frantic rhythm against the rich silk. When she descended the grand staircase, the only illumination came from strategically placed candles, casting long dancing shadows. He was waiting at the foot, a silhouette against the flickering light of the dining room beyond. His gaze, when it met hers, was a physical touch, warm and assessing, lingering on her face before sweeping down the length of her gown. A slow, appreciative smile graced his lips, and Alara felt a delicious shiver trace its way down her spine. "Alara," he murmured, his voice a low thrum that resonated through the quiet house. He offered an arm, a silent invitation, which she accepted, her fingers brushing the warm fabric of his sleeve. The dining room was bathed in golden light, the table set for two, exquisite and intimate. Over delicate courses and rich amber wine, their conversation flowed easily, touching on art, literature, and the quiet beauty of the estate. But beneath the polished surface of their words, an undeniable current of attraction hummed. His eyes, dark and intense, held hers a moment too long. His hand, reaching for the water carafe, lingered near hers. Each shared glance, each soft laugh, pulled them closer, weaving a silken thread of desire between them. As the last remnants of their meal were cleared, he rose, extending his hand. "Come," he said, his voice softer now, tinged with an unspoken promise. He led her not to the drawing room, but to a vast, moonlit terrace, overlooking the sprawling gardens. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of roses and damp earth. He turned to face her, his hands gently finding her waist, drawing her close until the silk of her dress brushed against his jacket. "Alara," he whispered again, his gaze dropping to her lips. She looked up, her own eyes wide with surrender and longing. The world narrowed to the space between them. The soft exhalation of their breaths, the intoxicating pull. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, sending a jolt of heat through her. And then he lowered his head, his lips meeting hers with a tenderness that was both exquisite and profound. A kiss that tasted of wine and moonlight, and a future she was utterly irrevocably ready to embrace.